Hello there, Jose Rodriguez here. Today was a wonderful day, beautiful outside. My wife and I did not have to pick up Nathan, so we took a drive out to Ellicott City, Maryland. That is a historic little town in Maryland where my middle daughter lives. And went to pick up some beautiful invitations that she created. She's a wonderful graphic artist and makes amazing invitations in cards and that sort of thing, much better than Grandpa does. And this is for whom? For Nathan's fifth birthday party. It is going to be a everything is awesome party. That's the theme. If you recall the Lego movie just recently that came out a year ago, and also recently the Batman movie, I believe it was, which was awesome for Grandpa to go see. Anyway, let's visit again the fading reports that have been coming out recently from Aardenburg. This is not the official published results. This was for the PA100 using PCK3 HD inks. For the Pro 1, using the Pro 1 inkset that they just put together this past year, and also the Pro 100 utilizing their inkset, dye inkset that is. The previous two are pigment. So let's just examine this a minute. Why do we choose to refill? We buy an expensive, relatively expensive printer. We want to produce wonderful prints, but then we sure as hell don't want to pay OEM ink prices. So we immediately look into a third-party ink choice, thinking we're going to get away with 1/8 of the cost of OEM inks and get the same quality and same level of longevity. No, 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 no. That doesn't work. So don't be shocked when the results come back and they don't live up to OEM levels of longevity. Of course they will not. So right now everybody's scurrying around like chickens with their heads cut off, having a panic attack because their OEM inks are better than the ones they bought from either PC or any other third-party provider. None of them last, including the very, very best ones that are the most expensive ones. Those actually fade as well. Now, what is the practical explanation or results, if you want to call them, about the Aardenburg test results? They put the test prints, these very ones here, through a very torture, yeah. What would be the, tortuous, with an O-U-S, set of light exposure tests, and these last for months. Basically, they will be exposed to what's referred to about 75 megalux of light. That is more than I can give a print on my west-facing window in several years. And that would be more than I would give or expose a print in my room or living room in 10, 15, 20 years. So does it really relate to regular home type environments? Not really. So of course your third-party inks will fade probably twice as fast as OEM inks. But let's think about this logically. This is the one now 8 months in my window, and we're getting some pretty blazing sunlight hitting that window. This is the differences that have taken place. Now, at first what happens is that all of the inks start to fade equally, so you do not see any type of dramatic color balance change. But then later on, some of the inks will begin to fade at a faster rate than others. And that's where you will get a nonlinear fading effect. But this is equivalent to 7 months outside in that window, getting hit by sunlight and all sorts of daylight, compared to possibly 5, 6, 7 years in a bedroom, in a living room, in a hallway, getting hit by what is very red most of the time incandescent light and thus does not contain too much UV. This is the dark storage one. This has not changed. This is the one stored in the room. And this has no discernible difference between the one stored in the dark and one stored open in the room. So, yeah, don't freak out too much over this. This is totally expected. And if you were so naive as to expect to get OEM performance all around in all categories and paying an eighth of the price, then maybe you shouldn't be in the home photo printing field. Maybe you should not consider that. That's very harsh comment, but it's true. Let me tell you a couple of the things that Aardenburg or Mark McCormick said. He saw some fading with the yellow ink on the PCHD K3 inks, and Precision Colors is looking into that. He's talking to the Epson chemist that created the ink set for that particular printer, and they will look into that problem with the yellow ink. And like I said, they don't sit down on their laurels. They are constantly improving matters, upgrading the ink sets and so forth, because they want to provide the best available product for a very reasonable price so that you can print at home without worries about ink costs. Okay, so they're looking into that. He stated that, of course, the P100 dye ink set will fade probably twice as fast as OEM. Well, OEM is supposed to last 200 years. Do the math. And remember, 75 megalux exposure is incredibly huge amount of light, which equates to probably years and years at regular room light conditions like I have here in my room. So now he's going to look at the original post, and I'll just show it to you. I'm not going to show you the name of the person, but this is the original post. The picture on the left is a freshly printed shot. The picture on the right is one done on Precision Colors dye ink for the Pro 100. 3 months old, and it has faded, as you can very easily discern. This is Mark McCormick's own words. This result has a classic look of ozone fading. Deja vu. Didn't I talk about ozone and oxidation problems with your environment? Okay? Keep that in mind. The original poster's address lists California. He doesn't say exactly what part of California he lives in, but you know what California is famous for. If you are in a highly urban area with common air quality issues, ergo Los Angeles, then ozone levels are routinely 20 to 50 times higher than folks located in more rural areas. Just like light fading, ozone fading is linearly proportional to the intensity level over a fairly wide range. Say, for example, your print shown above was exposed for 2 months to average ozone levels of 30 parts per billion. And for example, for me in a rural area in Massachusetts, I may have 1 part per million or even less. That is a 30-fold ozone fade rate difference between our two locations. So 2 months time in your location becomes 60 months, 5-year difference in my location to reach the same total ozone exposure dose. Hence, anecdotally, it's quite common for people to respond with very different personal real-world experiences concerning print fading. Environment plays an enormous role, a sobering reality that tends to be ignored when citing various vendors' claims for print longevity ratings. Then he goes into case history. Let's see how long this is. I don't want to put you guys to sleep. Case history. Epson and his contracted independent testing lab suffered a very embarrassing marketing mishap over a decade ago with the original launch of the Epson 870 and 1270 dye-based printers. I had both of those. And I remember those times. It was amazing. Listen to this. The testing lab rated the Epson prints from those printers at over 20 years on display framed under glass. But folks in some urban areas immediately began to experience the dreaded orange shift in prints lying about for only a few days. Few days. They didn't even have a chance to frame them. They were rightly skeptical that framing the prints or placing them in a covered album would help all that much. The problem was soon traced to ozone. The testing lab didn't have a high ozone level, and the phenomenon went totally undetected in the laboratory. Moreover, it had never been observed as a real-world problem with typical dye-based photo finished prints because the traditional wet process photo dyes in those traditional prints are safely encapsulated in a gelatin coating. The industry's quick fix to the dye-based inkjet ozone debacle was to immediately introduce swellable polymer type media, which is essentially a highly water-soluble gelatin coating that becomes soluble when the ink reaches its surface, and then the gelatin seals the dyes as it dries back down. Unfortunately, swellable polymer coatings have their own serious handling issues, so a better long-term solution was needed. Over time, the OEM printer manufacturers worked with dye chemists to produce far more light and gas fade resistant synthetic dye molecules. I'll stop a minute. Those original dyes were all organic dyes. I worked in the histopathology field for 24 years after I retired from the military. And we used the old histological stains from a couple of centuries ago. In many cases, the field of histopathology has switched over to synthetic dyes, and those increase longevity of the finished pathology slides, meaning the stained tissue slides that we give to the pathology to read. So even that field got hit with problems. HP Vivera dyes, Epson Claria, and Canon Chromalive 100 Plus are examples of these newer synthetic dye technologies. These dyes are proprietary, and the original manufacturers guard the know-how fiercely due to the high research and development costs and proprietary nature of the superior dye sets. Third-party vendors still typically have to rely on off-the-shelf natural dye stuffs readily available in the textile industry. Thus, third-party dye sets from the newest inkjet printers may well match the initial image color and tone afforded by the OEM dyes, but nevertheless will inevitably fall short in terms of light and gas fade resistance. I couldn't have put it better myself. What more can you say? One of these days, the dye chemists will be able to duplicate those dyes, believe me. They will be using the synthetic dyes. What happens often is there are very, very few, you can count them with your hand, providers of pigment, in other words, the raw material used in pigment inks, and also the dyes that are used in the raw form for so-called inkjet dye inks. That's it. There may be 50 different companies selling third-party products, but the sources are pretty much the same, unless you have a couple of chemists working hand in hand just for you. One company has that, and also Precision Colors has that. They have access to a chemist, and he is constantly looking into improving the color matching between the complete ink set, how they play together, how they get along, so to speak, how they are able to, by combination and dithering and the use of the proper profiles, be able to reproduce color in the same approximate manner that OEM equivalent inksets do. And performance as far as longevity will never achieve that of OEM unless somebody leaks out the formula and manufacturing techniques. and then they, basically illegally break the patent and start duplicating these inks. Who would have the nerve to do that? Not I. But, someday it just may happen. And so that would be the only way that these companies can, checking my recorder, that would be the only way that these companies could actually reproduce inks of the same level of performance as OEM. That's it. I hope you enjoy this. This is the truth of the matter. Again, but think about this. You guys will panic at the thought of having to buy a set of OEM inks. Put you in the poorhouse. Well, you knew this when you bought that printer. You knew this when you got into photo printing. And now you're trying to cheap your way out. This is harsh, I know. You're trying to cheap your way out, and you got to pay the piper. And when you have to pay the piper, you're paying it in the fact that you have less longevity. That means ink fade under certain environmental conditions. Like I said, I live just outside of Washington, D.C., but apparently my city, I have never seen smog here. Like in the Los Angeles basin where I grew up, that was horrible there. And I can imagine anything organic just oxidizing in a matter of days. And as the example spoke about the 870 and the 1270, those were horrible inksets. Okay, they faded within days. At work, when I had them at work, those prints didn't even last a week. At home, I managed to do pretty well with those inks. So, what can I tell you? Different environments have a huge effect on the rate of oxidation. And in this case, the fading is not caused so much by light exposure, but by oxidants in the air. So that is it. I hope this cleared up a couple of the questions you may have had, and at least alleviate some of that panic you may be undergoing right now about using third-party inks. But you know what? You knew that when you got into it. And I am a huge proponent of refilling, of saving the environment. We don't want these cartridges lining the landfills in our cities. We want to be able to reuse our cartridges. We want to be able to use inks that provide us or afford us the ability to print at home without any worries. But if we want the top level quality, we just have to pay the piper, and we have to go with OEM. And that is why I buy so many large format cards at a cheap price. I'm still printing with OEM, and I can afford to do so. And all you have to do is just follow the advice I've given you in other videos, and you too can enjoy printing at home on Epson printers, at least, because there's really nothing yet substantially available for Canon printers. But Epson K3 printers, yes, you can print as much as you want because you can afford to get these inks in these larger volumes. All right, that is it for now. Thanks so much. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and like. And until the next time, happy printing. Stop worrying. Bye-bye.